I'm going to do a brief introduction and then turn it over to Alex. So I'm Jordan Jobe. I'm the project manager of the AgAID Institute, which is led by Washington State University and one of 5 USDA NIFA-funded AI and agriculture institutes. I'm providing more of an introduction because we are welcoming some guests and we'll be posting this publicly. So this is for a resource for folks beyond just our institute. So that is exciting to see other folks logging in here. So one thing we've all kind of struggled with is communicating around the work that we do, in particular because it's hard to communicate about artificial intelligence. So Alex and I started talking last year about how it could be really helpful to provide some more insight in how to do this communication. And it's certainly more than a 1 hour long topic. So they are going to be providing us with a series of seminars on how to communicate around artificial intelligence. So I'm going to turn it over to them and they will let you know how this is going to work and then get started. Thanks, Alex.
No worries. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for turning up. If you don't know me, I'm Alex Kirkpatrick, Science Communication Specialist here at the AgAID Institute. And yeah, Jordan's right. Communicating AI is not easy. Communication is not easy, especially when you're doing it strategically and for the purposes of business, government, or research. But I wanted to start off really foundational and offer you just an insight into what social science understands so far about the public understanding of AI. So during this seminar, if you have any questions as we go along, you can drop them in the chat or put up a digital hand and Jordan can try and mediate, moderate. But I've also left a big gap at the end for a Q&A where you can ask me more direct questions, because with everybody so spread out and doing different roles, I know that you might have all different priorities, and I didn't have time to kind of analyze my audience too deeply. So I'll give you a general overview. If you've got any questions throughout, just butt in or just wait till the end and we can have a back and forth there. So I try to ask this question in most of my classes and seminars. It helps me know how old everyone is for a start. But when it's undergrads, I get to learn about loudmouth science YouTubers and TikTokers, but no offense, looks like I'll probably get more mass media responses today. But if you could just type in the chat an example of media that shaped your relationship with science, or perhaps made you want to study what you study now. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you mine. So like many British people of my generation, reading A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking was a transformative moment for my young brain. I was an avid consumer of popular science in my youth, but that one pop sci book transported me into a new universe, the universe as was, as opposed to the universe as my young brain had understood it before. And I must have read that book about 5 times. And it's ultimately responsible for me choosing to study astrophysics and cosmology at the undergrad level. NPR. Oh, yeah, NPR, right? A great source of solid science communication, books, movies. Does anyone have any specific books, like cosmology books? Brian Greene, Short History of Nearly Everything. Yeah, I listened to that one on audiobook. I love that. Crash Course Science, school books. Whoa, Meta Magical Famous. Steve, what is that? Yeah. Media didn't have an impact and can't think of anything. Wow. Teal, you grew up in a strange place, so I'll allow it. I mean, the not so subtle point I'm trying to make is that media is massively influential to science and scientists. Science doesn't exist in a vacuum, and nor do scientists. Formal R&D, like we conduct here at AgAID or that is taught at universities, is part of a tripartite, multi-directional polylogue, which I say because I like the word polylogue. It's just dialogue with more people. The distinction for me between science and communication is sort of arbitrary. From this perspective that I come at it, science is communication, a way of communicating shared reality. Communication is the final explicit step in the scientific process itself. Where language fails to communicate fact, we invent new languages in science like calculus, C++, Python. And like all languages, mediums, and media and social actors, science is shaped, influenced, defined by its interactions with other communication entities. And when science communication goes bad, it's often because scientists and their advocates wrongly assume the following sort of relationship. See, in this hierarchical or deficit model, AI science would be the monolithic pioneer of all thought surrounding AI, the alpha, the omega, the font of all knowledge. Science spits out new information in this model, self-generated, without external influence. And the sole aim becomes to translate our complex language into the languages of common people so that they can gain knowledge and see AI and the world the way we see it. But that's not a very scientific way of thinking about either AI science or AI communication. For one, data has refuted any one-directional model of communication influence ever since the emergence of media psychology and media studies as a field. Influence never just flows in one direction. So it's important to also note the strength of these interdependencies because they're not equal. So generally, publics, survey after survey, generation after generation finds that people who don't study science generally get their science from the media after leaving high school. Even most AI scientists will rely on media to stay informed of innovations outside of their field, right? For most of their lives, most people will have little choice but to rely on a version of science that is first mediated by journalists, media organizations, and informal channels. This content is itself informed by the preferences and the whims of the publics whose attention this media is created for, essentially to monetize their attention, right? And artificial intelligence as a concept, as a science, is this symbiotic system, a concept whose meaning is co-generated and evolving alongside society, media, and science. And as scientists, we can better diffuse our professional agendas and our ideas, our innovations by becoming more media literate and appreciating this relationship first and foremost, that members of the public who engage with science aren't like us. Even the media that they learn science from is generally different from the media we choose to engage with. If we prime ourselves to appreciate all the external influences, then that's a good foundation to build any strategic communication from. And of course, now there's a new social actor in town, an extremely powerful communication entity that helps to shape reality, audience perceptions, the nature of journalism, and even science itself. And that's AI, right? AI is unique because AI is media, AI is medium, and AI is itself an influential social actor capable of mutually impacting every other actor in this kind of tripartite system. In the language of science and statistics, early indicators suggest that AI might moderate and mediate all of these mutual dependencies. AI's influence on human communication is ubiquitous, from helping to generate scientific data, write scientific manuscripts even now, influence scientists through its influence on public communication and journalism, to defining the very technological capacity and bandwidth of the medium itself. And this is where my research sits, really, in this dynamic fluid of collective human thought we call communication and science. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been investigating AI in this system specifically. But first and foremost, really, I feel like we don't ask this enough. Without asking it, we rarely think about it. But without specific aim or reason, communication becomes vague or worse, unnecessary. Why bother researching or performing public science communication at all? I'm interested how you justify it. So just throw your answers in the chat. Yeah, the public perception could drive funding. Precisely. That comes under that democratic banner, right? We're spending public funds, whether the public know it or not. And so the argument is that they have a democratic right to be orientated towards that research and know what it's doing and what it's doing for them. Mandy, because non-scientists might be fearful and skeptical of what they don't understand. Exactly, right? Another aim of science is threat navigation, whether that threat be real or not. Either way, science is there to offer empirical reality to the situation in the lofty hopes that we can help people kind of skirt around risks, or at least, be informed. Non-scientists are the ones we're doing science for, exactly. Right, combat disinformation. Yeah, that's a big one nowadays, isn't it? Because if you yield science communication to the public and you believe in that one-directional downhill deficit model of communication, you're really yielding that space to other people. YouTube, for example, and communication channels like that, the anti-vax movement really congregated around that. And, they have real world influence and life-threatening influence a lot of the time as well. Yeah, I think you're pretty much hitting all the main bullet points here. You see, in science communication, we put them all under these umbrellas. Democracy, like we said, covers a lot, but like Steve said, specifically, we're spending public funds on research. So it's really hard to argue against there being a democratic imperative to communicate AI science to those who are paying for it. With society becoming increasingly polarized, the continued funding of AI is dependent on how publics receive new innovations, how they're framed, whether they trust them, and what their respective political parties tell them to think about it. This is not the space race, right? America now is not America of the 1950s. We are not getting behind science all as one. And our science is filtered through this ideological bubble, which we can better enhance our strategic communication by understanding what that bubble is and how ideology impacts that. Oops. So there are individual benefits as well. It's one of the primary motivations, like we said, was to help people navigate their environment, avoid risk, prolong life, perform better. These are all the things that science is supposed to do for society, but we can't do that without empowering the individual with the awareness, the knowledge, the ability to exploit the innovations that we put out there in the world. And when I say innovation, I don't just mean AI and technology, I mean thought, ideas, philosophies, right? These are all innovations. Then, of course, there's group power benefits, right? Would the US be the most influential actor on the global scale were it not for the Manhattan Project, Silicon Valley, the iPhone? National power is enhanced when science and technology can be understood and exploited by members of society. We already see international competition hotting up around AI. Whoever comes out top will do so in the end, not just because their R&D was great, but because their parent society knew how to engage with and use that science effectively. And we need optimal AI communication and education for that to happen in the US. And it's particularly difficult, isn't it? Because AI is such a fast-paced science and innovations are so rapid. So we hinted at this earlier with, well, I did anyway, in how I came to science. But many of us, like myself, first come to science communication because we just love science. We value it aesthetically. We believe in altruism and that knowing and engaging with empirical reality brings us closer to understanding ourselves. And AI presents an opportunity to engage people with science on that level because AI forces us to answer the question, what is unique about human intelligence? Where does consciousness spring from? How do we code technology for the greater good? What is the greater good? This is actually a distinct advantage of communicating AI. We can communicate AI as art, science, as philosophy, without having to try too hard. The audience is already primed to think of it in those kind of abstract terms. And this is already, as I say, how society treats that image on the right there. It's a nice primer because it's created by Stable diffusion XL 1.0, fine-tuned model of my own. But AI gives you an opportunity to show rather than tell innovation, which is fantastically important for communication. So when I arrived in Pullman to research my PhD, I got a lot of half sympathetic, half quizzical looks from people in communication when I told them I wanted to look at artificial intelligence. It was 2017, and there were some communication scholars who perhaps viewed AI as too niche a topic and as having no significant impact on established institutions like journalism. So the first step in my research was actually to justify AI as a meaningful topic at all and one worth spending time on. At the time, there were actually no peer-reviewed published research articles related to AI treatment in the press. There was research out there, but they weren't peer-reviewed and they didn't generally emerge from universities. So I just used NVivo and LexisNexis to search the national newspapers in the US and the broadsheets in the UK for mentions of AI in the main body of news articles since the 1980s. I excluded any entertainment articles that might mention AI in relation to a new movie or show. So just news, hard news. And what I found was that the press didn't take much interest until about 2014. But after 2014, media interest began to emerge around transformative breakthroughs and key opinion leaders and risk-based doubts. I presented this and other findings to the International Communication Association in DC in 2019. And soon after, a Dutch researcher replicated my methods, and lo and behold, this same pattern, this same emergence in around 2014 was found in Dutch reporting. We both conducted computer-assisted sentiment analysis too, finding that over time, the nature of the conversation hadn't really changed. Until about 2017, people were mainly still fixated on the novelty of AI, right? The pioneering science of AI. ChatGPT and other public-facing AI models weren't salient or available at the time. My findings weren't exactly novel or revealing in a theoretical sense, but it did justify the rest of my PhD and provide evidence that this was the next science for science communication to start focusing on alongside climate change and vaccines. But what's so important about the volume of media reporting? Well, what the mass media choose to cover or not cover is important to the field of communication because of one of our most fundamental and well-supported theories, and that's agenda setting theory. How important people rate an issue to society is proportional to how much the press and media choose to talk about it statistically. So when the media spend their attention on Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce in the US publics and politicians, if surveyed, would likely instinctively assess that to be a more vital topic to their society than, say, famine in Darfur. Objectively, history might disagree. However, human perception is not objective, nor is the media system. And that's the difficulty when communicating science, because objectivity is what we're trying to achieve in a lot of ways. But what's important isn't just how a media cover a topic, but the way in which they frame it. So if the media represent AI in correlation to workforce replacement, killer robots, and dystopia, then it's those elements of AI that are judged to be the most important to society and most worth talking about and addressing. And that means you kind of have to address them. Certainly more worth addressing than seemingly unexplored or unimportant aspects of AI, such as climate adaptation, enhanced national economy, or improved health and safety. Yet it's those elements that science might deem as being the most realistic, impactful, and worthy of talking about. So it's difficult because obviously you're often coming up against this invisible wall of what people want to talk about versus what you think they need to think about. But there are ways of getting people to think about things like that. It's all about us learning how to frame better. So our institutions may not have the clout of the New York Times or Nat Geo or Fox News, but we do have clout. We do not explicitly set the agenda of the day, but what we say in communication is scientists build the agenda. Without AI science, the press have little to talk about in relation to AI. And so we influence this agenda setting process by first performing and then framing our research, outreach, press releases, public presentations, media showcases. We can strategically emphasize the aspects we want to emphasize if we're clever about it and tactical. and we can pre-package AI for the media. And that's important nowadays because the media have depleted resources and very few dedicated science reporters anymore. Science reporters have been leaving media for years, and media don't hire them back. So it's usually beat reporters that they get to report on science. And beat reporters may have had no interaction with science and scientists before they try and do that. So essentially, not to be too unkind, but it can boil down to laziness on the media part. But with the fast pace of their environment, they're often completely dependent on scientists nowadays to pre-package all that information for them. And that's a real opportunity, because that gives you the opportunity to think about tactically framing your output, knowing that there are increased chances that that journalist or blogger or whatever from the other end is going to want to take that information and just report it directly, right, rather than put their own twist on it. So good opportunities to shape the agenda before the agenda is set. So let's get a sense of what the agenda of the day is related to AI. Spoiler, it's not the predominant agenda of the day. It rarely is, but there is an agenda being set nevertheless. So do a quick search and throw your answers in the chat. Just a headline will do, and a source. Bonus points for anyone who can share a link to a hot AI story published today. I've not even looked today. I woke up about an hour ago, so hopefully nothing's burning out there. And while you're searching away, I'll just tell you that headlines are often all we need to get a sense of the agenda and its nature, because research finds that nowadays, you probably instinctively know this, but people rarely read beyond the headlines. And so their impression of their social reality is often based on how often they see a topic referred to in headlines and the topic of those headlines. So what did I put at the bottom there? Headline: job loss. Yeah, right. And so I put at the bottom there, the first one I found when I was making these slides a couple of days ago was OpenAI CEO warns that societal misalignments could make artificial intelligence dangerous. And what do you think someone takes from that? Well, they take from it what we take from it. Artificial intelligence dangerous. Warns. Societal misalignment. I don't know what that means, but it sounds bad. Elon Musk sues OpenAI. Oh yeah, I did see that headline actually, right? Wow. Disruption. Yeah, a lot of talk recently about deep fakes disrupting the election, bots and things like that. Yeah, that will become more prevalent. Wait for any more. I think a lot of it is probably still threat-based, right? In the mass media, right? If you go to CNET or Wired, you might find some more techie focused things. But overall, time and time again, dystopian themes or risk themes are prevalent. And why is my, there we go. Hollywood is cited a lot if you actually read beyond the headline, and that's nothing surprising. This is just the media performing their kind of necessary surveillance function, right? What the press essentially do is monitor the potential risks in our environment. So, you know, if we don't see them otherwise, we might be aware of them. So it's not, you know, it is a function of the press to focus on threat like that. But when polled, scientists often malign the press for being too sensationalist or negative. But again, it's a necessary function that they serve. But that's not the whole story. While themes of threat are prevalent, if you read beyond the headline, again, the headlines are all people read a lot of the time, and they're very threat-based. But when you read beyond it, you find that discourses around economic benefits as well as technological gains fall alongside that risk conversation. For example, the positive impacts of AI on health and safety, traffic, your workplace performance, national economy, catching cancer, curing illness. However, From an evolutionary biological communication standpoint, it's the negative information that is more likely to be remembered and shared, regardless of the amount of positive information included. AI reporting, though, is a lot more positive than people generally assume. We are just evolutionarily predisposed to remember and overvalue the information about hazard. Yet perceived benefit is, of course, strongly associated with positive public opinion and uptake about AI specifically. More generally, positive perceptions related to a system's performance and its benefits on beneficial impacts to human performance are the driving factors behind IT adoption. Benefits need to be represented well and perhaps not alongside catastrophic risk. You know, if you're to publish something like this AI will make you faster at typing reports, but it also might misinform you and at a future date that we don't know about, kill your grandchildren, right? The information remembered isn't going to be AI is going to make me faster at typing up reports. It's not the salient memory. And I'll delve into this more in later seminars because I explore policy diffusion alongside AI diffusion. And increasingly, AI reporting isn't just about AI and what the technology might or might not do in terms of capacity. It's about policy and policy responses to societal threats like mass automation. This is the common trajectory of a science becoming a public science. First comes awareness, then comes the risks, and then comes the policy agenda. And this is important to us at AgAID, particularly because we're presenting technologies that do jobs that humans often do. To the public, this looks like replacement. And a popular response to that among low-income workers particularly and left-leaning policymakers is some version of the universal basic income, a standard living wage paid to all people regardless of their job status. Calls for this will likely get louder until mass automation isn't seen as a threat to public well-being. Of course, Andrew Yang ran on this for Democratic when he ran for Democratic nomination in 2016. I can't remember, but he made a big deal of universal basic income. I think in Europe, particularly, calls for that are getting louder and louder. And of course, AI isn't just communicated by factual media. AI is perhaps more saliently represented in popular entertainment media, science fiction, science in fiction, fantasy. Our reality of AI follows generations of fantasizing about AI. In that way, AI is unique. You see, I didn't build any mental models of COVID or renewable energy before I learned about it factually. However, when I was first introduced to AI, it was through fiction. It's fiction that constructed my earliest mental models of this science, which in some diffuse way will always be carried with me. And that could be problematic for obvious reasons, not least because AI has been pre-sensationalized, pre-demonized, and audiences are primed to think about it in threatening, distant, futuristic terms. But we often want our publics to see the nearby, right? The concrete reality of what's actually being developed and their association with AI as it stands and not the Terminator. And I read this last one just the other day. And it reaffirms how important that initial framing of your work can be. What we call the social progress frame is one where we talk about AI in terms of advancing society, but not just advancing to society, but doing it in a positive way that benefits other people. This kind of social progress frame is really shareable, really attractive to audiences, as opposed to the Pandora's box frame, which is very common in media, which focuses on the black box of AI, AI's hallucinations, or simply what happens when artificial general intelligence happens, which for some reason people think might happen in a couple of years, whereas in reality, if a thing was even possible, hundreds of years perhaps to reach that level. But people don't understand yet really what AI is and its limitations. And so selling that limitation alongside social progress can be really advantageous to diffusing your ideas, your media, your science. So while the media essentially define what's important to society's agenda, they only have very limited influence over what audiences actually think about those subjects. Remember, people persuade themselves of things. You can't tell people what to think, but you can tell them what to think about. Media can show you what people are talking about and what's important to society in perception. It doesn't necessarily show you what they think and feel, what audiences think and feel about topics. So firstly, it's important to acknowledge, as we know, that science nearly always carries with it risks. And usually science becomes a matter of public interest when those risks are flagged by mass media. Mass media and other non-scientists don't think about risk, they feel risk. Right? To a scientist, risk is the product of magnitude and probability. But publics respond affectively to threat, not cognitively. In risk psychology terms, we call it a probability neglect. People feel the potential magnitude of a risk, and they do not factor in the likelihood of it actually happening. And that's why we see this social amplification of AI risks like superintelligence, mass unemployment, robot takeover, because their magnitude is vast. And without factoring in the probability of them actually happening, the risk seems great too. And that's common across all sciences when we try to communicate them. This is kind of problematic because people are generally inclined to share information about risks, not benefits. Influencers and advertisers share benefits. The common Homo sapien at their keyboard shouts about risk like a howler monkey screaming a warning about nearby predators in the forest, right? We are evolutionarily fixated with risk and warning the great apes that we care most for in the forest about these risks, right? This is the Darwinian biological side of communication. It's innate and relatively fixed across cultures and languages. As we say in communication, if it bleeds, it leads. Don't ignore the conversation about risk because risk is where the public are at. It's what they care about most. If you don't frame your risks, someone else will, right? If you don't address risk, you seem elusive, untrustworthy, and not a reliable monkey in the troop, because reliable monkeys in the troop warn you about potential hazards, regardless of the probability. Friends warn friends about threat. So this is a huge issue because ultimately it's the benefits that drive public support, but you can't persuade that AI is beneficial without acknowledging the risks and diminishing the risks where appropriate. I feel too often scientists avoid conversations about risk because they think it's detrimental to encouraging adoption, but not necessarily. If you can legitimately reframe and diminish a risk like global superintelligence, AI takeover, then you increase the value of a synchronous kind of benefits argument. Also, scientists often, let's face it, avoid talking about risk because frankly, they lack respect for the emotions of the public, right? This creates intergroup barriers between us and them, how we think probability magnitude versus how they think probability neglect, fear, right? And there's a communication barrier. So it leads to less mutual trust, less information flow. So emphasize benefit, diminish risk politely and kindly, and show empathy for public fear. Yeah, there's evidence to suggest that there is a real lack of awareness and understanding of AI, and that's prevalent across Europe and America. Associated with this lack of awareness are cybersecurity fears, some realistic, of course, your bots and spam and things like that, but some less so as well, your Skynet takeover. Where a lack of concrete awareness and understanding exists, conspiracy and misinformation thrive. Okay, so really framing those risks and framing awareness of what AI is here in the now in the concrete is really important to stemming misinformation, which impacts all science, all public science. While around half of US respondents are aware of common uses of AI, only about 1/3 can correctly identify AI's presence in 6 everyday technologies that they use frequently, like spam filters, chatbots, facial recognition. It's kind of the GPT effect, right? People talk about AI, that's what they're talking about, large language models, because they're the salient thing at the minute. But of course, we know that's just a small part of the picture. So before we leap to public understanding of AI, it seems a lot of work still needs to be done on simple public awareness of AI in everyday activities. And by concretizing AI and saying, look, you're already using it, it's in your pocket right now, or you've been using it for these years in spam filters, or it's in your Ring doorbell, or something like that, that can help provide kind of a spatio-temporal kind of concrete construct for them to focus on and take their mind away from these futuristic threats that they've been exposed to through media. In 2019, another Pew Research study found a good deal of pessimism about AI's impact. This is a big indicator of how AI is likely framed in the public sphere and the overall performance that people expect from it. It seems that a good deal of work also needs to be done to emphasize the benefits of AI and not just its already ubiquitous nature or the reality of its risks. People need to feel a personal gain in performance for them to see the benefits of technology. One of the biggest drivers of adoption of AI and other ICTs is a concept we call performance expectancy, which is often misinterpreted to think we've got to emphasize what our system does, the system's performance. But that's not important because the public, non-scientists are, like all of us, egocentric. Performance expectancy is about them. It's about what your system does to their performance. How do they perform better as a result of engaging with AI? Not how well does the AI perform. That doesn't mean anything to them. What does it do for me? How does it make me better? What do I look like? What do I look like with this amazing innovation on my farm? You know, how do I benefit? Where does my money come from? What's my future look like? Never mind the technical capacity. Yeah. Only about 15% in the US are more excited than concerned about AI. That's a recent one too, right? So again, this threat train, this futuristic threat, AI misalignment, AI joblessness seems to be having its effect, right? Only 15% more excited than concerned about AI, just a fraction. So from a comms perspective, there must be a way of showing both technical capacity alongside enhanced human value and experience, right? Because otherwise we call it a symbolic threat. You have the realistic threats of AI taking your job, destroying your income, taking your life. And then you have the symbolic threat. And when a social group like AI is anthropomorphized often and seen as a social group to non-experts, when it's perceived to carry a symbolic threat to the in-group, people often exclude, malign, even attempt to eradicate the out-group, of course. In Silicon Valley, where I am now, a lot of the campuses, they have robot security guards rolling around. People fight them. People attack them, right? It's crazy. Yeah. So people who pay more attention to AI in the media expect the highest performance from AI, actually. But when we say media, we're often talking about, well, first and foremost, there's a difference between attention to the media and exposure. In communication, they're two different variables measured differently. We can all get exposed to a lot of media, but what are you focusing on? What are you paying attention to? And the people who actually pay attention, who are reading beyond the headlines or perhaps going to the tech-specific blogs and things like that, they're really supportive. They're really positive. And they tend to share a lot of information about it and expect the greatest performance for themselves. So something to be read into that. All in all, AI, like many sciences in their infancy, is a total brofest, right, as far as the public are concerned. And this is a wider problem in science, that women and their interests are largely neglected in the public conversation, especially about technology. In fiction, AI is often framed like the rest of science as a nerdy pursuit for beta males or the weapon of a deranged man. And this is problematic for so many reasons, but it doesn't exactly invite young women and people of other genders to engage in AI sciences. Some do, of course, and we have them here. Uh, but in general, en masse, young girls don't want to grow up to be nerdy tech bros. They will avoid negative or undesirable social stereotypes at all costs. This is a wider problem for science, is unpacking the media-built stereotypes that act as mental shortcuts or heuristics to audiences, right? Because when it's focused on gender things or the stereotype of the mad scientist, or nowadays the kind of tech bro, people start associating that with other things like Elon Musk, alt-righty kind of ideologies. And yeah, to a young girl, the last thing they want to do is grow up and be like those people. We can help with that by enhancing the visibility of all people, including the real life men we have amongst us that don't wear lab coats all day and have wacky white hair like people are expecting, right? So we have an opportunity to also help people construct role models and to show people that AI affects all of society, but it is a concept for everybody to engage with, right? And hopefully in the future, we can start to operationalize more than, potentially half of the planet and start bringing in everyone. But the media will probably continue to stereotype us. So we need to communicate AI and its impacts for so many reasons, not least of all because it's an integral part of the scientific method, right? It's that last step, it's communication. We don't generate AI in a vacuum. So we need to always bear in mind where people are actually getting their science from and the media influence on ourselves as well as them, right? And that gives us the greatest foundation to kind of influence their media cosmos. And that takes media literacy on our part and fostering greater media literacy amongst science audiences. Climate change, vaccines, GMOs, and more have all taught us that fake science, pseudoscience, and misinformation flourish when media literacy is lacking in both scientists and audiences, right? People are dependent on media to stay informed about AI, but media is dependent on science to stay informed about AI. And that gives us power and influence if we know how to tactically, looking for a better word than manipulate their system, but tinker. Frame. There we go. Frame. So people are aware of AI on an abstract level, but concretely, they don't even know when they're using it. By making people aware of AI in everyday activities other than chat GPT, you increase familiarity, which decreases threat, which increases trust, which increases support and the continued funding of our work. Knowledge and awareness aren't everything, but they are a necessary foundation. But just because someone is familiar with AI or expects it to work really well doesn't mean they expect positive impacts in the long term, right? Only a very functional and well-designed AI could conquer the world. I don't feel we should ignore far future concerns when we communicate publicly, right? Or else we're just ignoring a large part of the public conversation and leaving publics at the mercy of speculative fiction, anti-science, and the abstract predictions of non-experts. So addressing risks, no matter how irrational you may feel they are statistically, is an opportunity for us to frame benefits and reinforce the reality of our work and the current state of AI that people use every day. Risk as a feeling also implies a good opportunity to showcase empathy and build trust by listening to concerns and addressing them earnestly. And as an aside to that, you can't really combat people's appreciation of risk by talking about probability, right? There's a complete heuristic probability neglecting people. For years, climate communication tried with the statistics of the reality of climate, and they couldn't figure out why people didn't respond. And it's because you're talking about probability. There's really no point with your 97% of scientists agree, rah, rah, rah. People don't care. It doesn't affect their brain. They think about the magnitude of the risk. And if they're watching Fox News and the magnitude has been decreased, there's like, well, there's no risk. So we need to find human ways of interacting. And that means understanding our audience and addressing the things we know they care about. And I'll get onto this more later in later seminars, but in an ideologically polarized ecosystem, all science is political. While the politics and divisions surrounding AI aren't as advanced or manifest as issues like climate change, gender affirming care, MMR jabs, they are still there and becoming more manifest over time. So we don't yet know how polarization will happen around AI. It could be that conservatives end up favoring it more because of power and economic reasons, while liberals, they usually hate the idea of automation historically, and any action that would negatively impact lower income workers. And so it might polarize in the sort of opposite direction where conservatives are more pro AI science, liberals not. I see evidence of that in my own data, but that's a maybe prediction, right? There's nothing confirmed about that, and it's not obvious yet at all. At the minute, we're still in that awareness phase, but that gives us a great opportunity to shape that narrative, just as long as we don't ignore media and its impacts and our potential influence on that system. So these are my references. I'll just share these slides with you. You don't want to read them, do you? I'll get a PDF of this and share it with you. But I've got enough time at the end here just for a quick Q&A. Are there any questions from what I've gone through so far, or anything you just want to bring up or chat about?
Alex, quick question. Great presentation, by the way. How important, so scientists for good reason are very preoccupied with defining terms. From a public communication perspective, though, how important do you think defining terms, especially AI, is from a public communications perspective? Because if I was on the spot forced to give a clear definition of AI and say AI versus ML, I may struggle for a second. So I'm just curious, though, where your work comes down on that in terms of, should we bother spending a lot of time coming together with an agreed upon definition of AI for the purposes of public communication?
Yeah, that's definitely an advantage, right? I'm a big advocate of getting these definitions down. I would just say, get them down, practice them, make sure they're uniform across everybody. It's difficult with AI because in my own work, I think like in my published work, in my earliest ones, I defined AI a certain way. And then by the time I got to next year, there were different, more credible versions of what it meant. So formalize your definition, but carry with it in other words, because what publics need is they need to hear the technical side from scientists, even if they don't fully understand it. But then you drive it home with your, what I call the in other words translation, right? So you give your technical definition of AI and they go, well, what that basically means is, and then offer a colorful sort of metaphor or something like that from their environment around them to concretize it. You don't really get anywhere by using one or the other. In my research suggests that actually people don't appreciate it scientists aren't very persuasive when they attempt to communicate purely on a personal level, right? Because we are distant, abstract construals. We have this concept called construal matching, where like if someone sees you as a distant entity, they expect distant communication, which is statistical and difficult to understand. But they will allow the narrative side as well, as long as you're carrying with it that. So give your scientific definition, but have another one prepared alongside it. So formalize your ML definition alongside your AI one, and then as a group or whatever, generate an in other words response as well. So when people ask what AI is, you can give them the difficult scientific one. And then when you see their face go white and blank, you just go, in other words, what that means is, and then give them the friendly version as well. So by no means should you ever really eliminate the technical side of science. That's not what science communication is about. People want to hear that, but you do need to offer a more human version alongside it, right? To help concretize and personalize what you just said, right? You have your abstract, you have your concrete, deliver both.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. Yeah.
No worries.
Teal had a question in the chat she's going to ask.
Example of when a team addressed
I can ask you if you want.
Yeah, go on.
Thanks. I really appreciated your framing of risk and how it's important to address it. And I'm wondering if you had an example of a team. I'm thinking more of teams as opposed to moving perceptions of the public, but either is fine. An example where a group addressed risk, adequately and reframed it to minimize it in order towards, refocusing on opportunity. I mean, that's something that seems pretty powerful, but what were the sort of key elements of bringing people along for that?
Yeah, a lot of my published research on media effects experiments that focus particularly on techno-scientific risk. And I'll just be honest with you, it's difficult. It's much easier to prime risk than it is to prime safety and benefit, right? Because what we want in science is very often to bring the abstract into the concrete. When people start thinking concretely about things, that is the area of the kind of mind that is associated, according to construal level theory, with threat, right? We worry more about the threat in the back garden than we do about the threat in Australia, assuming you don't live in Australia, right? Because one's proximal, one's distant. But we have to bring the abstract into the proximal, and that does prime risk. One way of kind of dealing with risk is, again, never to ignore it, but to acknowledge it and acknowledge the magnitude and understand that offering a probability argument of that's unlikely. Don't worry about it. Your child isn't going to become autistic from this jab. That won't really matter because, well, the price of them being autistic as a result of this jab is huge, and I don't care about probability. So I know that doesn't work. Okay, by the way, spoiler, I'm going to have a lot of things that don't work. I'm still trying to figure out what does work. But also, it's like other things as well, right? If you're framing a risk, or no, if you're framing something that you don't think is a risk, we're less threatened by things we're familiar with, right? A family member swinging an axe is a lot less frightening, even though just as dangerous as someone we don't know swinging an axe. But the unknown enhances risk, right? Risk and uncertainty go hand in hand. You have very little control over what they feel risk-wise, but you can control the other side of uncertainty. You can lower the uncertainty. With AI, you can say, listen, it's not just chat GPT or joblessness or robots or things like that. It's in your doorbell, it's in your phone, it's on social media. Familiarize, proximize, and say it's already all around you. You're using it all the time, and it's enhancing your daily performance. It's making it easier for you to talk to people. It's making it easier for you to use technology. It's something that already benefits you. And so you reduce the uncertainty, and uncertainty is associated with risk. So indirectly, you can lower the risk by increasing certainty, increasing awareness, right? Empowering with subjective knowledge. If someone feels they know more, whether they do or not, they feel more empowered, less risky situation. So I'd say go after the uncertainty aspect rather than trying to diminish risk, because that risks kind of making someone feel like you don't care or that they're silly for bringing it up.
Great, thanks.
A common framing is problem, team, progress, benefit. I'm sorry, I don't really understand that question. Can anyone clear that one up for me, Alan? Okay. Well, I think we're running out of time now anyway, Jordan.
Yep, sounds great. Alex, let's see, I'm making sure that your email, your website is along the bottom. And if you'd like to connect further with Alex, you're welcome to connect with me or with them directly. We have 2 more seminars from them coming up, I believe, on March 15th and April 29th. And you should all have that flyer with information about that. And we will be sharing the link to this with those who accepted the invite via Outlook, and we'll make sure to spread it around on our LinkedIn page as well. So please feel free to share the recording broadly with your community so they're able to benefit from this resource. Thank you so much, Alex, for your time and energy and sharing your knowledge with us. I think this was a really beneficial seminar, and we're excited for the next 2. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.